all. Remember our theme as we go through our lesson this evening about God's questions, that God doesn't ask questions in people's lives for information. He asks those for contemplation. So as you and I open our Bibles tonight, we're going to open our Bibles to the first book ever written in the Bible. Going the wrong direction. It's Job. I like to say that. See how many people turn toward Genesis. It's Job. Job was quite possibly the first written book of inspiration. The book of Job has intrigued me for years, and I guess still does. I enjoyed very much the way Brother Cates taught this particular book. I was one of the last few classes that had an opportunity to have him as a regular instructor before he died of something. Yeah, he had cancer of the, starts with an L, something. Anywho, it almost seemed as he was teaching this class, he was telling me about a friend that could have grown up with him in the lower portion of Alabama. He had studied this particular book for decades and knew it as well as you and I would know our Social Security number. There are a lot of questions within this book, and we're going to look at some of them when we get to chapter 40 or 38, 37, 38-ish. But before we get to God speaking to Job, we need to look at God speaking to Satan in the first couple of chapters. So as you and I are introduced to Job in this book, the Holy Spirit writing this book starts very matter of fact. There was a man from the land of Uz whose name was Job. Perfect, upright, feared God, eschewed evil. You know that's a statement. He's just a guy. Here's a guy who lived in Uz. Really, is he like anybody else? I don't have any proof of him. Well, he's telling you he existed. He's telling you he lived. This is not a book that would be some sort of allegory for a country or a particular group of people. This is the life of a man who seemingly, chapter 1, had it pretty good. Look at what he has. God goes from chapter 1, verse 1 to verse 2 and 3 and mentions the physical possessions that Job has. First, he mentions 7 sons, 3 daughters. His substance was 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 donkeys, a very great household, so that this man was greatest of all the east. Many times when we look at Job, we start to develop who he was by what he has, and we start by saying he has X amount of, he has 7,000 sheep and 5,000 this, and that's not how God portrays Job at all. See, when he begins to speak about what Job has, he starts with the most important things that Job has. That being 7 sons and 3 daughters. Those are his treasures. Those are going to be what he would miss the most when all of these things are taken away from him. When he is mentioned down in verse number 4, or his children in verse number 4 and 5, is that they have opportunities where they get together, it seems like on each other's birthday, everyone his day, verse number 4, and they have a party. They understand birthday parties and why birthdays are so special, and that, you know, the older we get, the faster that they come, and perhaps one day these children won't have their siblings around. So they're making the most of their time together. And then it is verse number 5. Job would say he would send to sanctify them. He'd raise up early in the morning. He would offer burnt offerings according to the number of all of his children. For Job would say, it might be that my sons have sinned and cursed God in their hearts. And Job didn't do this just once. Job didn't do this just twice. As a matter of fact, the King James Version I'm reading tonight would say he would do these things continually. That is, he has a vested interest in how his children believe and what they think. Why? Would God cease to be God if everybody stopped believing in Him? Everybody worldwide? No, He still would be God. We still would be accountable to Him. But it is Job who is saying they need an example. They need for me to show them. They need for me to be praying for them. They need for me to be the example of how they are supposed to follow God. Now, I want you to focus in on verse number 6, because this is generally where the question comes in. Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also among them. For us, out as we're reading it, generally our question begins to pop up, right? Why is Satan there? What's he doing there? I thought he couldn't be in the presence of God. Let me tell you everything I know about this verse. Are you ready? Write this down. Apparently God approved it. Because He's the one who called it. How did it happen? I don't know. It was way before my time. Why did it happen? I don't know. I wasn't there. All I know is it seems like God approved of this because He's the one who called them there. And so there's a reason behind it, and just because I don't know it doesn't mean it's not so. He says to Satan, God says to Satan, where have you been? I've been walking to and fro, up and down on the earth. I've been looking for folks to kind of trick. To quote the great Charlie Daniels, he had probably at some point gone down to Georgia. You know that song, The Devil Went Down? Okay. All right, it's okay. Snickering is okay. And so, here's what the Lord said, verse number 8. God says these words to Satan. And we'll look at how Satan answers it in a moment. But I want us to focus in on the words God says to Satan here. And the words are, have you considered my servant Job? I don't know if this particular scenario happens from time to time with God and Satan. I don't know what God would allow. He's allowed to allow whatever He wants. It would scare me to death to know that God would have this dialogue with Satan and say these words, have you considered my servant Billy? That would scare me to death. But God knows the outcome of this book, even when He says to Satan, have you considered Job? God knows what's going to happen. But I'm here to tell you, Job doesn't. And Job is going to be the one who is faced day by day with the ability to choose to leave God or to choose to stick closer to God. And while God knows exactly what's going to happen, and while Job doesn't, it's got to be a tough time for Job. How many of those sleepless nights that he has does he think, why am I doing this? Won't I just stop? How many of those nights that he has where he's itching himself or scratching this or can't get comfortable, where he thinks, why don't I just give up? How many nights have you had? Or something's on your mind, you can't go to sleep, or you can't get comfortable, or it just something won't let you go to sleep, and you think, why don't I give up? And the fact of the matter is, you have the choice. A lot of times we don't say that from the pulpit, do we? But you still have the choice to stop. You have the choice to quit. You have the choice to forfeit all of eternity for whatever's right there in front of you. How many of you have ever been extremely tempted to stop? How many of your parents have to deal with children or even worse, maybe a child who's passed away. I can't even imagine that. Having to deal with children who have everyday problems. I was reading some sort of statistic this past week, and it said that children growing up today have the same amount of stress that would be put on an insane asylum patient in the 1950s. I guess. I don't know, I'm 48. I think I'm grown. I can see it in both of my daughter's faces. And try to help as I can. It's not really enough. They know I'm there. They know I'll take care of whatever I can. They know I love them. They know Miss Brandy loves them and take care of whatever they can. But sometimes they have to go through some things alone. And I, as a father, don't like that. Miss Brandy married me 23 and a half years ago now so that I would drive her anywhere she wants to go. Apparently, that's what I do. But there's an underlying psychological deal with driving her wherever she wants to go. And that is, I want to be in control. And when she or the girls drive, they drive well, but I don't feel like I'm in control. I want to have control of what's going on. And with the girls in their lives, I want to have control, but it ain't my life. I can't do that. And with Miss Brandy, I want to have control, but it's not my life. I can't do that. I have members of my family, much like you, who at one point in time had known the truth and now have turned away from it. And I want to make those decisions for them, but I can't because it's not my decision. So, probably much like you, I see them at milestones in your life. And I assume then that they don't really want to speak very much. It's generally at funerals. I say, well, we can't go talk to the preacher. You know what he's going to say. Now, what I'm going to say is, I love you. I'm praying for you. I wish I could make the right decisions for you. How about you? How about your friends? Who, as good as gold as they are, and as good as gold as some of mine are, they're just not members of the church. They don't see a need in it. They don't see any desire in it. And they don't see any need to study about it. Great, fantastic folks. And I wish I could obey for them. They're lost. There's nothing I can do about it other than encourage them and continue to pray for them. Continue to slide in on the slide those Bible studies. What do you think about this? You know, and don't break out a Bible because they get all freaked out, but just sort of walk them down that path a little bit. I've never dealt with this, but what if you have a spouse or an elderly parent who would turn away from the gospel? Things in their life or events in their life so drastic that they can't see God really anywhere now. What do you do? Job is in the very beginning stages of this particular journey when God has said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job? He'll say it to him twice in 2 chapters in the first part of the book of Job. We mentioned earlier God knows what's going to happen and Job doesn't. And that needs to be key as you and I look throughout this entire book. Really, it ought to be key as you and I look throughout this entire question. Have you considered my servant? And then just insert your own name. You ever feel like the weight of the world is too much? You ever feel like there is no right answer? I can either choose option A that's wrong, or option B that's wrong, or option C of doing nothing and that's wrong. You ever feel like you're drowning? And wish someone would help? Job's going to know all of those emotions and more. Job's going to know what it's like to be at death's door. And seemingly pray to God for death, and it never comes. Job's going to understand what it's like to have children who have passed away. And I wonder as he closes his eyes at night and he tries to get comfortable and tries to go to sleep, he sees them as babies. My oldest daughter's 21. My youngest daughter's 17. I still see them as babies. And one we probably don't explore enough is the amount of stress that is put on him, not necessarily by his wife, but for his wife. You know what she's having to deal with? The loss of her children, the loss of her family and house, the loss of her livelihood also, and she has to watch her husband seemingly fall to pieces. How in the world does she deal with it? And how does he deal with it? Looking at her like any other husband would say, I don't want her to go through those things. All because of the question, have you considered my servant? Listen, I'll be honest with you. I would wish at that point in time God would not ever say my name. Don't put me through that. I know that God still knows everything, still understands everything, and I know that God still has all of the answers. But I think he might just be wrong if he thinks I can make it through that. I don't know that Billy Hayes doesn't close up shop within the first 2 or 3 chapters of this book. Have you considered my servant Job? And then you have Satan who answers him back, who says, Job only serves you because you put a hedge around him. Because you provide everything for him, you have provided everything for him, and you've kept everything off of him. Is the only reason he serves you. Interestingly, really what he's saying to God is, Job serves you because you give him something, not because you're worthy to be served. Job only serves you because you give him something. It's at this point where God would say to him, you can touch anything on his body or anything that he has, but you don't lay a finger on him. And then they go through this process again to where Satan would answer the same question, have you considered my servant Job? And he said, skin for skin, a man will give up everything he has for his help. 9 years ago, May of this year, 9 years ago. So I told you I go into the hospital and I'm 38 pounds lighter in 3 weeks. Did I tell you that one? I lost 38 pounds in 3 weeks. Y'all look at me like this. Basically because the flap to my stomach didn't open and my esophagus doesn't work properly. So if anybody's wondering why does he drink a lot of Coke, because it helps everything go down. Plus Coke's good. I don't know if you ever had it. So I had a little doctor who was about this tall. He had about 15 hairs on his head. And he looked like he invented medicine. That's how old he was. Come into this room at UAB Hospital in Birmingham and say, Mr. Hayes, you're going to die this week. If you don't have surgery, you're going to die this week. Well, that'll sort of wake you up. You know what we did that week? Had surgery. Had surgery. Then we repaired all that kind of stuff, and we made it through those things. And 2 months or so later, this thick packet of stuff came in the mail. And right at the top corner it said UAB. I was like, oh, what this is going to be? It's going to be a detailed bill. And it was. And that surgery cost $598,000. Miss Brandy's always been a school teacher. It cost us $300, and really the church I was working for paid that, so it cost us nothing. So hooray. Thank you for little blessings like that. And could you imagine having that surgery and then having that bill to pay on top of it? What are you going to do with that? Skin for skin. What would you pay for your health? Nothing? Something? You know the old saying, if you don't have your health, you don't have anything. And that's what Satan says about Job. If you'll let me get a hold of him in his health, we can knock him down a peg. Well, for the next 30-ish chapters, Job is plagued with sleepless nights due to uncomfortableness or because of nightmares. He has boils from the top of his head to the bottom of his feet. He doesn't want to eat. He finds himself at the end of chapter 2 sitting in you know what a trash pile is? Just sitting in a trash pile, scratching himself with a piece of a pipe. And we have the opportunity through 30-something chapters to get a chance to feel what he feels like. And imagine this. He asks God, he has the audacity to ask God why. And let's see how many people will lie right to your face. Wouldn't you? Yeah. I would too. Why? I've been doing his basic argument is, I've been doing everything you want me to do, the way you want me to do it. Why is this happening? You know what? It's an okay question to ask. God never corrects him and says, you don't ask me why are these things happening. It's not that Job questioned God. Job just had some questions for God. Well, God allows him throughout these 37 chapters to kind of get all of that off his chest. And in chapter 38, we start our next question. Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, who is this that darkeneth counsel by words without knowledge? Notice this, gird up thy loins now like a man, for I am a demand of thee, and answer thou me. Interestingly, verse number 3, if we were to translate that into our normal vernacular of the day, Job would be asked by God to man up a little bit. Won't you man up and answer these questions? So God's going to ask him questions. And he's going to start by saying this, where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? You and I should know automatically from the first question God's going to ask, where were you when I was laying out on a line and a grid the cosmos? When he begins that way, Job just shove himself under some rock so that he can't be seen. Because God is about to go into a series of questions. And the only thing Job can do is kind of look at him and go, I don't know. I don't know. Matter of fact, the next chapter he's going to ask this question. Do you know when the wild goats of the rock will bring forth? Do you know what the gestation of the wild goats are that you see out there? Do you know where the sun, the moon, and the stars are? That's chapter 37, verse 30 and 31. How about verse number 24? Here's some scientific principles that we didn't know until later in life. Do you know how light is parted? I don't know. I didn't even know light could do that. Do you know where the light dwells? No. Look at chapter 39 and verse number 13. Did you give the goodly wings unto the peacock? Did you make that peacock look as beautiful as it does? Was that you doing that, Job? No, that wasn't me. All right, did you give wings and feathers to the ostrich? Now, do you ever study the ostrich? An idiot bird. I don't know if you can say that as it streams out, but that's just what it is. Zero maternal instincts. She would put her nest right on the ground and kind of just fluff dirt around it so that maybe either water would stand in it or stay away from it. I'm not sure which she's trying to do. You know, we obviously know they stick their head in the sand, right? They try to hide themselves by doing what any good 2-year-old will do. You know, you can't see me. And with all of those other redeeming qualities God put in her, the ability to be super aggressive. So she's just a great animal. She'll kick you to death just as well as look at you. Matter of fact, at times she kicks open her own eggs. What a dumb animal. You know how that ostrich works, Job? I got no clue. And perhaps where he lives, maybe he said, I don't even know what you're talking about. I don't even know what an ostrich is. He keeps going down this list. What about an eagle? Do you know why it makes its nest up on those rocks? Or do you just assume it always does that? And then in chapter 40 and 41, he gets into 2 other animals. Now, I need you for a moment to go back into the statement I made where I said turn to the oldest book, the first written book of the Bible, and everybody started going toward Genesis, and I told you it was Job. Job more than likely is written somewhere between chapter 12 and chapter 13 of the book of Genesis. This is post-flood time, right? Flood happens 6 through 9, and 12 and 13 is later, right? Look, am I speaking Spanish? Do y'all understand what I'm saying? It's 13 is later than 9, right? All right, okay, good. And so, some of those animals that made it onto the ark, because of the change of the earth with that flood, after getting off that ark, don't survive very long. They survive a while, but not very long. But Job has an opportunity to talk about 2 animals that you and I have never seen, but apparently he has some familiarity with. First, this one called Behemoth. It's probably interesting for you and me to know that it's in 1842 or 3 when the word dinosaur was first invented. Terrible lizard, big lizard, great lizard, something like that. And so when they say there's no dinosaurs in Bible. Well, that's because it was written before 1843. But two examples are found here in Job. This first one is an interesting, where he says, what about this behemoth that I had made, the one that eats grass like an ox? And his strength is in his loins, and his force is in the navel of his belly. And he has a tail like a cedar tree, and it has sinews of stone wrapped together. And he drinks up the river where he's at. Why don't you go out there and just catch one of those? I don't even know how you do that. I don't know where you would start. I understand and know, because I can read Genesis chapters 1 and 2, that if it was made in 6 days. True or false? True. So that tells me then that dinosaurs and people ran together. Now, imagine, if you can, going out to your backyard garden there, and you want to get some turnip greens. Y'all don't know about turnip greens. Y'all like the under the ground part. You throw away the good part. Put those turnip greens. Listen to me. In a pot of water, and let them things boil for a little bit of time. Put a little seasoning in there, a little ham hock. You got something. Anywho, you're going out to your garden to pick some vegetables, and this guy's standing in there. Do you continue to pick, or do you try to shoo him off? Or do you just go like this? Okay. We'll just go back in the house for a while. Apparently he has some kind of familiarity with him. God would tell him, if you're such a big man, Job, if you're the guy who needs all the answers, why don't you just tell this guy what to do? Then he speaks of the next one. Now, what I'm going to say about this next one, Leviathan is an odd creature, first of all. Second of all, we've not seen anything like him, ever. But when we get closer down, I'm going to tell you what I think. And you don't have to think that way. You can think a whole other way. But I'm just going to tell you what I think. All right. Can you draw out Leviathan with a hook? Can you put a hook into his nose or bore a hole through his jaw? Can you tame one, is what he's asking. Look at verse 7. Can you fill his skin with barbed irons? No, because he is pieced together like an armor. Look at the verse 14. Can you open the doors of his face? His teeth are terrible round about. His scales are his pride, shut up together like a close seal. Look at verse number 18. By his nestings the light does shine. His eyes are like the eyelids of the morning. Here's verse 19. Out of his mouth burning lamps and sparks of fire leap out. Out of his nostrils goes smoke, and as out of a seething pot or a cauldron. His neck remains his strength. 23. His flakes of flesh are joined together. They cannot be moved. Look at verse 31. He maketh the deep to boil like a pot. Does that sound like a dragon? I know that sounds weird, because we put dragons at times in unicorn places and go, well, that's all fantasy, but is that what it sounds like? Do you know that every continent on the world has some sort of ancient drawings and ancient writings about dragons? Do they exist? Once again, I don't know. They may have. What it appears to be, even if it is not that I think it is, even if it is not that, here's a ferocious beast that no one can tame. To which God would say, Job, if you'll just wrangle him up, I'll give you every answer you want. Now, turn over to chapter number 42. And look at how Job sees himself after God has suggested him to Satan, after he has asked why several hundred times, After God has said, listen, I have been in control, I am in control, and I will continue to be in control. Here's what Job says about Job. Then Job answered the Lord and said, I know thou can do everything, and that no thought can be withholden from thee. Who is he that hideth counsel without knowledge? Therefore I have uttered the thing I understood not, things too wonderful for me, which I knew not. Hear, I beseech thee, and I will speak. I will demand of thee, and declare thou unto me. I have heard of thee by the hearing of the ear, but now mine eyes seeth thee. And here it is in verse 6. Wherefore I hate myself. It was never God's intention to make Job feel terribly. It was always God's intention to have Job realize that God is still in control even when your life seems like it's out of control. God still has his hand underneath all of it. He's still God. He's still the same God from creation that he will be throughout human existence and into eternity. He's still that same God. He has never wanted Job to feel bad about himself, never wanted Job to feel like he's silly or like he's foolish for asking those questions. But as Job looks back and he says, all these dumb questions I've been asking, I've not put it into your hands, and I hate myself for it. It's not the case singled out to only Job, where when people feel silly or foolish about the things they have done, that they would mimic those same words. I can't believe I did that. I hate myself for doing it. The intent with which Job would say that is well known, well understood by us. Let me ask you a question. What if you lived through this life and you never got the answers you wanted? One, because you may not have gone to the right source, or maybe those questions are just unknown. You never got the answers you wanted. You never were convinced that God was real. And when this life is ended, and you stand before that judgment bar on high, you finally realize God is real, but now it's too late. It's better for Job in chapter 42 to realize God is real and it's not too late. There's so many of our friends, our family, and even our brothers and sisters who at one time were here, who are not. Who will wait too late. They'll just wait too late. I guess every preacher has his own style of how he does certain things like funerals. What I like to do in a funeral is find out some information from the family that maybe people in the community and didn't know. And then sort of open up a different view of that person than you and I may have had before. And I always like to end with, if that person were able to come back today and say something to you, here's what he or she would say. Follow God and be obedient. Every single person who has passed from this life into eternity, whether they be righteous or wicked, will come back and say the exact same thing. Follow God and be obedient. Job, if he were able to come back, follow God, be obedient. Have you considered my servant Job? Well, if that question is asked about you, would God even be able to Hebrews chapter 11, verse number 6, for without faith it's impossible to please Him. Would you repent of your sin? Luke 13:3. Tell your neighbor, except you repent, you all likewise perish. Would you confess that Jesus is the Christ? Acts chapter 8, verse number 37. I believe Jesus Christ is the Son of God. Would you then be baptized in water for the remission of your sins? Acts chapter 8, verse number 38. They stopped the chariot, they got out. Philip walked down into that water with that eunuch, and he baptized him. Would you do those things? To be his servant? The reward of the servant of God is eternal life. But that is not the end of the story. And if it were, I'd be lying to you. Or if I said it was, I'd be lying to you. Because after you get out of that watery grave of baptism, after you're drying your hair off, you're taking those wet clothes off, putting new dry clothes on, is when it all sort of starts. Because God expects His servant to be faithful. Revelation chapter 2 and verse 10, Jesus would say toward the end of that, be thou faithful unto death, and I'll give you a crown of life. Paul would say in that 2 Timothy chapter 4 and verse number 6, I fought the fight, I finished my course, I kept the faith, henceforth is laid up for me a crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will give me on that day, but not only to me, all them, all of us who love His appearing. Are you His servant? Are you His faithful servant? If not, make those corrections right now while we stand and sing for your prayer.
Somebody will stand at the bar.